Imagine a ruler, not just any ruler, but the commander of the faithful, the spiritual heir to Muhammad himself, pacing through his own treasury. It is February in the year 1258. Gold glitters, piled high, stretching as far as the eye can see. This is the wealth he spent 50 years guarding. Gold that bought silks, gold that paid scholars, gold that filled colossal vaults. But the men flanking him are not his guards. They watch his face, their expressions unreadable, waiting to see if he understands the true horror of his situation. He doesn't speak. Behind him, he knows, his magnificent city is ablaze, the screams of his people lost to the roar of the flames. Ahead of him, however, awaits something far worse than fire. This is Caliph al-Mustasim, and in just 3 hours he will be dead. Not by blade, not by arrow, not by any method you might expect.
For the forces that devoured his city, that annihilated his empire, followed rules you have never heard of. What they did to his family was not mere execution. It was a terrifying form of architecture, a blueprint drawn in blood, designed to teach every king from Damascus to Delhi the precise, excruciating cost of defiance. They wouldn't need to repeat the lesson. They only needed to teach it once. For 5 long centuries, Baghdad had been more than a city. It was the very axis of thought itself. Here, Greek philosophy converged with Persian astronomy, Indian mathematics intertwined with Islamic law. The world's accumulated knowledge gathered in libraries, meticulously cataloging everything from medicine to mechanics. The legendary House of Wisdom alone housed texts that would demand 3 lifetimes to merely read. Here, a scholar named al-Khwarizmi invented the foundations of algebra.
Another, Al-Razi, penned medical encyclopedias that Europe would painstakingly translate 400 years later. Scholars journeyed from as far as Spain to Samarkand, drawn by the luminous promise of Baghdad's academies. The city's population swelled beyond 1 million souls. Its infrastructure was a marvel, channeling fresh water through intricate underground canals. Its bustling markets traded exotic goods from distant China to the farthest reaches of Cordoba. Its hospitals welcomed and healed patients, regardless of their faith or their fortune. This was no fading Rome slowly sinking into memory. This was a civilization at its absolute operational peak, vibrant, expansive, and utterly unparalleled. Ruling over this splendor was the Caliph. He was not merely a king, nor simply a political figure.
The Caliph was the direct successor to the Prophet Muhammad, the supreme spiritual authority over millions upon millions of Muslims, a man whose legitimacy stretched back through 37 unbroken generations. Al-Mustasim inherited that sacred title in the year 1242, but he also inherited something far less glorious, a government that had been slowly decaying for 2 centuries. The Abbasid Caliphate still spoke with profound religious authority, yet its armies consisted mostly of paid mercenaries. Its governors behaved like semi-independent warlords, carving out their own small kingdoms. Its vast treasury, paradoxically, remained filled, yet it was rarely, if ever, spent on defense. Baghdad had always survived internal weakness before, the court believed. It had endured civil wars that threatened to tear it apart. It had outlasted rival caliphs who challenged its supremacy.
It now watched grand empires rise and then spectacularly collapse all around it, while its scholars continued to write and its markets continued to thrive. So when distant reports began to trickle in from the east, speaking of terrifying horsemen who had already utterly erased the Khwarezmian Empire, horsemen who had systematically depopulated entire cities in Persia, horsemen who stopped for neither rivers nor mountains,
nor even carefully negotiated borders. Baghdad took note and did nothing. These Mongols were not merely an army. They were a sophisticated mechanism, a brutal, efficient system refined over 50 years of relentless, continuous warfare across terrains that spanned the frozen steppes, scorching deserts, and jagged mountain ranges. When Genghis Khan passed away in the year 1227, he left behind something truly unprecedented. Not just conquered territory, not merely subjugated peoples.
He left a military doctrine that transformed warfare itself into a replicable, chillingly effective process. And one of Genghis's grandsons, a formidable leader named Hulagu Khan, was tasked with carrying this devastating process westward. In the year 1253, the Mongol Kurultai, a grand council, assigned Hulagu a very specific objective: secure the submission of every single state situated between Mongolia and the distant Mediterranean Sea. This was not just about military defeat, this was about absolute, unequivocal submission. Because the Mongol Empire wasn't built on occupation, it was built entirely on compliance. Cities that submitted early and without resistance were allowed to retain their autonomy. Their established leaders remained in power. Their people were permitted to continue their lives, largely undisturbed. They simply paid tribute, a tax, and acknowledged Mongol supremacy. Cities that dared to resist simply ceased to exist.
Every single target city received the exact same chilling sequence of events. First, Mongol messengers would arrive. They would present their terms, always in writing: submit immediately, send tribute, provide hostages, typically the sons of rulers, accept Mongol governance. Compliance, they assured, meant survival. Your ancient walls would remain standing. Your bustling markets would stay open. Your population would live. Refusal, however, triggered nothing immediate. No further threats, no fiery ultimatums. Just an unnerving, profound silence. Weeks would pass. Sometimes months would drift by. The city would continue its routines, its defenders perhaps beginning to wonder if the Mongols had been bluffing, if they had moved on to easier targets. Then, without warning, the horizon would fill. Not with chaos, not with scattered groups, but with horsemen, moving in perfect, coordinated formation. Cavalry units, arrayed with terrifying precision.
Siege engines, enormous and menacing, would arrive on heavy wagons. The army would not attack. It would simply surround the city completely. Every gate, every road, every conceivable escape route. Then, construction would begin. In full, unobstructed view of the terrified defenders atop their walls, the Mongols would systematically assemble their siege equipment. Trebuchets, designed to hold massive stones weighing 300 pounds, would take shape. Engineers, brought from distant China and Persia, would work tirelessly alongside Mongol soldiers, their expertise merged for maximum destruction. The defenders would watch these monstrous machines being built, knowing they were specifically designed to dismantle their very walls, stone by agonizing stone. A second embassy would then arrive. The terms would be repeated, word for word, exactly as before. This, they would declare, was the last chance. Most cities, at this horrifying juncture, would surrender.
No refusal continued. The siege would begin, not as a chaotic, desperate assault, but as a chilling, preordained procedure. When the walls inevitably collapsed, infantry would move through the breaches in precise, disciplined units. When the great gates broke, cavalry would secure the routes,
cutting off all escape. The city would fall section by brutal section. Once inside, the population would be divided. Artisans would be identified and spared, scholars identified and spared, engineers identified and spared. Everyone else would be gathered in vast fields outside the city walls. What happened next was documented by multiple horrified sources. It was not random violence, it was systematic elimination, a purge of unimaginable scale. The few survivors would be resettled in distant Mongol territories. The city itself often would be burned, not as punishment, but as cold, stark evidence. Because the Mongols didn't conquer for territory alone, they conquered for absolute compliance.
And every ruined city became a terrifying textbook, a gruesome lesson for the next. By the year 1257, Hulagu had already applied this devastating system across Persia. Nishapur had refused, its population had been eliminated. Merv had refused, a city once called the city the world depends on, systematically depopulated. Herat had refused, reduced to smoldering ruins. Refusal, everyone now knew, had consequences that echoed across generations. And now, Hulagu turned his gaze towards the greatest city between Persia and Egypt, Baghdad. In September of the year 1257, Hulagu dispatched his envoys to Baghdad. 3 lone riders, bearing a single terrifying letter, arrived at the caliph's court. Their message was stark, devoid of pleasantries. You have heard what has befallen the cities of Persia. You know the cost of refusal. Present yourself at our camp. Submit to the authority of the great Khan.
Dismantle your fortifications. Send your sons as hostages. Do this, and your city will be spared. Refuse, and you will learn what the others learned. The letter landed on the caliph's court on a Thursday. By Friday, the debate had ignited, tearing through the gilded chambers of power. Caliph al-Mustasim convened his most trusted advisors, but the room divided instantly, a chasm of opinion opening beneath their very feet. His vizier, a pragmatic man named Ibn al-Alkami, urged immediate, unconditional compliance. He laid out the chilling evidence with brutal clarity. The Khwarezmian Empire, once boasting 400,000 soldiers, fortified cities, and mountain strongholds, was gone. Nishapur, with its 30-foot thick walls, had been erased. Merv, once hailed as the city the world depends on, now lay in ruins. These are not mere raiders, my lord, Ibn al-Alkami pleaded, his voice heavy with grim certainty.
This is a military system refined across 50 years of continuous, brutal warfare. We cannot fight them. We can only survive them. He recommended immediate submission, the full payment of tribute, and the opening of Baghdad's gates before any siege could even begin. But the head of Baghdad's army fiercely disagreed. The Mongols, he argued, were horsemen, cavalry of the open steppe. They excelled in wide, unhindered terrain. Baghdad's ancient walls had stood for centuries, never once breached. They have no experience, he declared, with siege warfare against prepared defenses, and they are far from their supply bases. They cannot maintain a prolonged siege in hostile territory. A third faction invoked theology, their voices resonating with pious certainty. Baghdad, they proclaimed, was the very seat of the caliphate, the spiritual heart of Islamic civilization. God, they insisted, would simply not allow pagans to destroy the sacred house of the Prophet's lineage.
Divine protection they believed, was assured. Al-Mustasim listened, a man of 54 years, having ruled for 16. He had never faced a military crisis of this monumental scale. Contemporary sources describe him as fond of luxury, deeply devoted to scholarship, and deeply uncomfortable with military matters, placing unwavering trust in the sheer authority of his exalted position. He looked from Hulagu's terrifying letter to his divided advisors, and he made his choice. "We are the Caliphate," he pronounced, his voice firm, echoing through the court. "We do not submit to threats from mere horsemen." He ordered the Mongol envoys dismissed. No tribute would be sent. No preparations would be made for advance. Ibn al-Alkami, the pragmatist vizier, made one desperate final attempt. "If we refuse," he warned, "they will come." "Then let them come," al-Mustasim replied, sealing his own and his city's fate.
The envoys departed Baghdad on September the 24th, 1257. They carried no response, merely the chilling confirmation of defiance. What followed was even more telling than the refusal itself. The caliph did not mobilize his army. He did not reinforce his venerable walls. He did not open his vast treasury to fund any defenses. Instead, he simply continued his daily routine, as if the threats would miraculously dissolve through sheer inaction. Meanwhile, 300 miles to the east, Hulagu's massive army began its inexorable movement. On November the 11th, 1257, Mongol advanced forces appeared 30 miles east of Baghdad. Scouts rode back to the city, their reports urgent. Cavalry units estimated at 5,000 horsemen, no siege equipment visible. The military commander of Baghdad saw an unexpected opportunity.
If this Mongol force was small and isolated, Baghdad could destroy it in open terrain. A swift, decisive victory would demonstrate Baghdad's formidable military capability and surely discourage any further Mongol advance. He recommended immediate offensive action. The Caliph, emboldened by this perceived weakness, agreed. On November the 13th, Baghdad's field army marched east. 20,000 men, a grand assembly of 12,000 cavalry and 8,000 infantry. This was the largest force the Caliphate had assembled in decades, brimming with confidence. They carried 3 days of supplies. The plan was simple, direct: intercept the Mongol advance force, engage in open battle, destroy them before any reinforcements could possibly arrive, and then return to Baghdad, victorious and triumphant. November the 15th, 1257. The armies met 25 miles northeast of Baghdad.
Baghdad's commander deployed his forces in traditional formation, cavalry on the wings, infantry solid in the center. The Mongol force was visible across the field, smaller than expected, perhaps 4,000 horsemen. Baghdad's cavalry surged forward, confident, powerful. What happened next was recorded by the few horrified survivors who fled back to Baghdad. The Mongol line retreated, not in panic, but in perfect, synchronized coordination. They fell back, disciplined units maintaining their order. Baghdad's cavalry, sensing victory, pursued. The retreat continued for 1 mile, then 2 miles, still organized, still drawing them deeper. Then the flanks appeared. Mongol cavalry units, previously hidden in gullies to the north and south, emerged simultaneously, a terrifying wave. Baghdad's cavalry found itself surrounded, not by the 4,000 horsemen they'd been chasing, but by 15,000, a crushing, inescapable trap.
What followed was not a battle in any traditional sense. It was a methodical dismantling. Mongol cavalry archers fired relentlessly, even while riding at full gallop, their composite bows capable of punching through armor at 200 yards. Baghdad's cavalry tried desperately to regroup, but their formations had already disintegrated. Officers shouted desperate orders, lost in the overwhelming chaos of arrows and thundering hooves. The infantry, watching from their distant position, saw the cavalry wings simply disappear into the Mongol formation, devoured. They began a terrified, desperate retreat toward Baghdad. The Mongols did not pursue the fleeing infantry. Instead, they coolly surrounded the remaining cavalry and systematically eliminated them. By nightfall, it was all over. Survivors who reached Baghdad reported a horrific truth. Of the 20,000 men who had marched out, fewer than 3,000 returned. The Caliph's personal guard annihilated.
Cavalry mercenaries destroyed. Baghdad's field army no longer existed. Not routed, not scattered, but utterly, completely erased. When the chilling survivor reports reached the court, the nature of the situation changed irrevocably. This was not a mere raiding party. This was a sophisticated, deadly trap. The Mongols had used a small detachment to cunningly draw Baghdad's main army into the open, then eliminated it with surgical precision. By December, the main Mongol force, an immense, terrifying tide, was visible on the horizon, and Baghdad's walls were all that remained of its once mighty defenses. On January the 11th, 1258, the Mongol army completed its total encirclement of Baghdad. Hulagu commanded an estimated 150,000 soldiers. The Mongols didn't just surround Baghdad, they built an entire infrastructure of wall. Fortified camps were established at every gate. Guard rotations were meticulously scheduled.
Supply lines, long and resilient, stretched all the way back to Persia. Escape for anyone became utterly impossible. Then, the Mongols began assembling their colossal siege engines, not hidden behind their lines, but in full, brutal view of the terrified defenders on the walls. Chinese engineers, working with geometric precision, toiled alongside Mongol soldiers. Trebuchets, monstrous and terrifying, were built with chilling efficiency. Baghdad's defenders watched the construction day after day. They could see exactly what was being prepared. They could calculate, with dreadful certainty, precisely what it would do to their ancient hallowed walls. On January the 17th, Hulagu sent yet another embassy. This time the message had changed. The time for full submission has passed, it declared, but the Caliph may still preserve his life. Open the gates, present yourself, order your garrison to disarm. Do this within 3 days, and the population will be spared.
The Caliph convened his few remaining advisors. The pragmatist vizier Ibn al-Alqami once again recommended acceptance. "We have no field army," he stated plainly, "no allies coming. We have no way to withstand what lies outside our walls." But the religious scholars, clinging to a dying hope, still invoked divine protection. The Caliph hesitated. 3 days passed. No response was sent. January the 29th, at dawn, the trebuchets began firing, not randomly, not for mere intimidation, but systematically, with cold, calculated precision. The Mongol engineers had spent 2 weeks meticulously calculating wall thickness, structural weak points, optimal impact angles. The massive stone struck the very same sections repeatedly. Each impact created insidious microfractures in stonework that had stood firm for 5 centuries. The bombardment continued for 8 relentless hours, then stopped. A terrifying silence. The Mongols waited.
Overnight, the damaged sections weakened further, groaned under the invisible stress. February the 1st. The bombardment resumed, concentrated now on the visibly weakened sections. By afternoon, ominous cracks were clearly visible from inside the city, snaking across the once impenetrable surface. By evening, the eastern wall of Baghdad, a symbol of its enduring strength, began to crumble, dust rising like a funeral shroud. February the 5th. The eastern wall collapsed entirely. A section 90 feet wide simply disintegrated, dissolving into a massive pile of rubble. Mongol infantry moved toward the breach, not charging in a desperate frenzy, but walking in disciplined formation. They entered Baghdad in units, secured the breach, established a perimeter, and began to advance, block by relentless block. Baghdad's remaining garrison tried to hold the breach, but they were hopelessly outnumbered, completely outmaneuvered, and utterly outfought.
By nightfall, the Mongols controlled the entire eastern quarter of the city. On February the 10th, the Caliph, utterly broken, sent an envoy to Hulagu's camp. The message was brief, a desperate plea for mercy. "I will surrender personally. I will open the gates. I will order my garrison to disarm. Spare the city." Hulagu's response arrived within hours. "Present yourself at my camp tomorrow, alone." Yet on February 13th, in the year 1258, the Caliph did not walk out of Baghdad alone. He brought 3,000 members of his court, his sons, his ministers, his scholars, his generals. They walked through the breached gate, unarmed, a procession of the condemned. Mongol guards flanked them immediately, not overtly threatening, but unmistakably present. The procession moved silently through the vast Mongol camp. Soldiers watched, their faces impassive, a sea of silent observation.
No insults were hurled, no violence erupted, no visible anger shown, just cold, calculating scrutiny. Hulagu received the Caliph in his command tent, a temporary structure that now presided over the fate of an empire. Hulagu's first question was chillingly practical. "Where is your treasury?" The Caliph hesitated, perhaps clinging to a last shred of dignity. "We are prepared to offer tribute," he managed. "Where is it?" Hulagu pressed, his voice unwavering. The Caliph, defeated, provided directions. Hulagu dispatched soldiers to verify. They returned 3 hours later, confirming the Caliph's words. The vault was opened. What they found inside defied imagination. Gold ingots, thousands upon thousands, silver coins, countless chests overflowing, jewels accumulated over generations, sparkling with the condensed history of an empire. Silks, enough to clothe an entire army. Hulagu ordered the entire treasury meticulously documented. Then he ordered the Caliph brought there.
The Caliph was led back into Baghdad through streets now patrolled by Mongol soldiers, past buildings that had begun to smolder, a ghostly haze hanging in the air. He was taken to his own treasury. The massive doors stood wide open, exposing his life's accumulated wealth to the harsh light of his conquerors. Hulagu walked him through, room by magnificent room, vault by vault. They didn't speak, but the question, unasked, hung heavy in the air, a crushing weight. Why was this immense wealth sitting here, locked away, while your walls crumbled? Why were these countless coins in storage while your soldiers went unpaid? Why was this gold hoarded while your city prepared for nothing? What happened next is reported differently across various historical sources. The Persian historian Rashid al-Din records that Hulagu ordered the Caliph to eat his gold, to literally consume the wealth he had valued more than his people's survival.
Whether this literally occurred is a matter of historical debate. What is unequivocally documented, however, is what followed. The Mongols adhered to Tungist spiritual beliefs. One of their core taboos was that royal blood must never, under any circumstances, touch the ground. Spilling it directly, they believed, would bring cosmic imbalance, an unforgivable sacrilege. So, when executing nobility, alternative methods were always required. For the Caliph, they chose a specific, gruesome procedure. He was wrapped tightly in a thick carpet, completely bound, his arms immobilized, his legs rendered useless. Then he was laid on the ground outside the treasury, a silent, helpless bundle. Horses were brought forward. The horses didn't trample him randomly in a fit of uncontrolled fury. They were led slowly, deliberately, across the wrapped figure, repeatedly. The immense weight of the horses, traversing back and forth, crushed the body inside the carpet. No blade was drawn.
No executioner announced judgment. No formal proclamation of death was made. When it finally ended, the Caliph was dead. No royal blood had touched the sacred earth. The taboo was satisfied. But something else, far more profound, had been created. A method of execution that would be discussed in every royal court, from distant Anatolia to the farthest reaches of Delhi. A death that carried a chilling meaning far beyond mere execution. The Caliph's sons were separated from the court group, all of them. Contemporary sources report they were executed the very same day. Some accounts suggest they too were wrapped and crushed, mirroring their father's horrifying fate. Others hint they were killed out of sight, their deaths less public, but no less certain. What doesn't vary across any account is that all of them died. No heirs survived. The Caliph's lineage was severed. The Caliph's daughters were also taken from the group.
Their exact fate is recorded vaguely, obscured by the fog of history. Some sources mention them being distributed among Mongol officers, a horrific fate. Others say they were sent east into the vast, unknown Mongol territories. After February the 13th, they simply disappear from detailed historical record, swallowed by the conquering tide. The 3,000 who had walked out with the Caliph, his ministers, his scholars, his generals, were systematically divided. Those with demonstrably useful skills were identified and removed from the doomed masses. Engineers were spared and sent to serve the Mongol war machine. Physicians, their healing hands deemed valuable, were spared. Administrators who possessed crucial knowledge of local governance were also spared. The rest, the vast majority, were executed outside the city walls. The Abbasid dynasty, a legacy of 500 years of continuous rule, ended that day. No succession occurred. No heir escaped.
No continuation of the sacred line was possible. The family line that traced its ancestry back through 37 generations to the Prophet Muhammad's uncle was utterly severed, broken beyond repair. And the news of this colossal, horrifying fall began spreading across the known world even before the bodies were cold. After the Caliph's death, Hulagu gave Baghdad to his soldiers. For 13 harrowing days, the Mongol army divided Baghdad into sectors. Each unit was assigned specific districts, a methodical, terrifying partition of a once vibrant metropolis. They moved systematically, building by building, street by street, an inexorable tide of destruction. Anyone with demonstrable skills was separated from the general population. Artisans who worked with metal, wood, or stone. Scholars who could read and write, whose minds held the accumulated wisdom of ages. Merchants who possessed invaluable knowledge of trade routes and markets.
They were marked, identified,
and removed to camps located outside the burning city walls, their skills deemed worthy of saving for now. Valuables were collected systematically with an almost scientific precision. Gold, silver, priceless jewels, rare silks, fragrant spices, ancient manuscripts, everything of value was meticulously catalogued and removed, destined for the Mongol horde. Everyone remaining, the vast, terrified throngs, was moved outside the walls, herded like cattle. What happened next is described in sources from multiple perspectives, each account a testament to unimaginable horror. The elimination was methodical, brutal. Estimates of the death toll vary wildly, a testament to the sheer scale of the slaughter. Contemporary sources claim anywhere from 200,000 to a staggering 1 million dead. Modern historians, with the benefit of hindsight and archaeological evidence, suggest the actual number was likely between 90,000 and 200,000.
What is verified beyond any doubt is the terrifying aftermath. After the civilian population was dealt with, the city itself was addressed, systematically dismantled. The legendary House of Wisdom, that beacon of knowledge, was burned to the ground. Manuscripts, countless irreplaceable texts were thrown into the Tigris River. So many, it was said, that the river itself reportedly ran black with ink for days. The Grand Mosque, a monument of faith, was partially demolished. The Caliph's magnificent palace was razed, reduced to rubble and dust. The intricate canal system, the lifeblood of the city's infrastructure, was deliberately damaged, sabotaged. This was not random destruction, but a calculated, deliberate act designed to ensure Baghdad could not quickly recover, could not rise again to challenge Mongol supremacy. On February the 20th, Hulagu, his grim work complete, ordered his army to withdraw. They left behind a city utterly transformed, its spirit broken.
Entire neighborhoods had been erased from the map, simply ceasing to exist. Its infrastructure lay damaged beyond any immediate repair. Its once vibrant population was reduced by at least half, perhaps far more. But they also left something else: survivors. Specifically, survivors who could tell others, with their own terrified voices, exactly what they had seen, what they had endured. Because the Mongols did not want Baghdad erased from memory. They wanted it remembered. They wanted its horrifying fate to echo across the centuries, a permanent warning. Within weeks, the chilling story of Baghdad's fall reached Damascus. Within months, it reached Cairo. Within a single year, every court from distant Anatolia to the farthest reaches of India knew exactly what had happened. Not just that Baghdad had fallen, but precisely how it fell, and what exactly happened to the man who, in his arrogant self-assurance, believed he was untouchable.
After February of 1258, something fundamental shifted across the entire Islamic world. Cities that had been meticulously preparing for valiant resistance suddenly reversed course, their defiant resolve shattered. Damascus, a city as ancient and proud as Baghdad, opened its gates without a fight long before the Mongol army even arrived. Aleppo, another jewel of the region, preemptively sent both tribute and royal hostages, a desperate gamble for survival. Smaller emirates scattered throughout Syria and Iraq submitted without ever seeing a single Mongol soldier, their will to resist evaporating in the face of Baghdad's gruesome example. Because Baghdad hadn't merely been destroyed, it had been painstakingly, brutally demonstrated.
rulers across the vast region performed the same agonizing calculation, a grim equation of survival. Resist? Face a prolonged siege you cannot possibly win? Watch your cherished city burn to ashes.
Die wrapped ignominiously in a carpet, while your entire family is systematically erased from history. Or submit. Retain your position, your power, your life. Pay tribute and survive. The equation was stark, crystal clear, etched in blood and smoke. The Mongol expansion finally came to a grinding halt in the year 1260 at the pivotal Battle of Ain Jalut. There, the Mamluks, a formidable military state based in Egypt, achieved what had seemed impossible. They defeated a Mongol army in open combat. But even the Mamluks had learned the chilling lessons from Baghdad's fall. They did not rely on impregnable walls. They did not trust in sacred authority, no matter how profound. Instead, they built their entire society around one single, unwavering purpose: creating a military force uniquely capable of stopping the Mongols in the field. They studied the Mongol system with meticulous diligence.
They adapted elements of it, turning the enemy's tactics against them. They prepared specifically, relentlessly, for that inevitable confrontation. Because they understood what Baghdad hadn't. The Mongols were not mere raiders you could wait out, hoping they would eventually tire and depart. They were a relentless, adaptive system you absolutely had to match, tactic for tactic, strength for strength. Baghdad, astonishingly, survived as a city. Slowly, tentatively, people returned to its scarred landscape. Markets eventually reopened, the echoes of commerce resuming in shattered streets. Trade, the lifeblood of any great city, gradually restarted. But Baghdad never, not truly, recovered its former position as the unparalleled center of the Islamic world. That prestigious mantle had moved elsewhere, a phantom limb on a once mighty body.
Legendary House of Wisdom was never rebuilt, its irreplaceable collection of knowledge scattered to the winds, drowned in the Tigris, or simply lost forever. The brilliant scholars who perished in the slaughter were never replaced, their unique contributions silenced permanently. But something else, something far more insidious, persisted: the memory of what defiance truly cost. Long after Hulagu's death, long after the vast Mongol empire fragmented into disparate khanates, long after the distant steppes fell silent, the terrifying shape of Baghdad's fall remained. It was preserved in chilling chronicles that circulated across continents, whispered warnings repeated in royal courts whenever advisors debated the perilous choice of resistance, calculated with grim precision in every throne room that dared to consider defying a superior force. Titles, the fall of Baghdad taught, do not negotiate with tactics. Tradition does not magically stop siege engines.
Sacred authority, no matter how divinely ordained, does not deflect arrows. When powerful systems collide, the one that adapts, the one that learns, the one that evolves, is the one that survives. The one that doesn't, tragically, becomes a case study. And some case studies, once they are seared into the collective memory, echo for centuries, their lessons reverberating through time. The Mongols did not need to utterly erase Baghdad from existence. They needed everyone else to know, with absolute certainty, that they could and would. And they needed every single ruler to understand, in vivid, brutal detail, exactly what would happen to those who naively believed their exalted position made them immune, untouchable.
That chilling message, delivered through destruction and death, outlasted the very empire that sent it. Because what happened in February of 1258 wasn't merely a military action, a localized act of warfare.
It was more profound, horrifying act of communication, a message written in smoke and stone, in rivers that ran black with ink, and in the tragically carpet-wrapped bodies of kings. It was a warning that traveled faster and farther than any army ever could hope to. And some warnings, once taught with such terrible clarity, never, ever need repeating.